Good to see you too. All right, thank you.
Lisa has been a professor of sports management at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. for more than 30 years. She's attended 20 Olympic Games and says sports diplomacy traces back to the beginning of Olympics history.
In 776 BC, when the Games were first created, the ancient Olympic Games, they had an Olympic truce where the kings got together and said, during the Games, we're going to put weapons down and allow athletes to travel safely to Olympia, where the Games were first held. So that was the first really sports diplomacy on record.
Why is it that sports is able to transcend, these conflicts?
Well, we all admire and appreciate the talents of athletes. And, we can all bond around that and cheer for the athletes, unlike anything else. Religion, politics, there's definite two divided aspects. But in sports, we all, again, recognize and appreciate and applaud the efforts of the athletes. One of the main things that we all look for is escape from reality. And sports gives us that. We can get into somebody else's world and follow them and feel like we're associated with them. And by us cheering for them, and when they win and lose, we feel that as an affiliate of that team, as a fan.
Sports diplomacy is credited for the renewed relations between China and the United States in the 1970s. In April 1971, the American table tennis team, which was competing in the World Championships in Japan, was invited to China. It became the first American delegation to set foot in China since 1949. Later known as ping pong diplomacy, the visit laid the groundwork for official diplomatic communications that would reopen the U.S.-China relationship. So can you talk about the residual effect of athletics and sports and the Olympics, and how maybe in some ways we see somebody in a different light?
Sport is often used for conflict resolution, where in different parts of the world where two sides are having conflict, they come together on a football pitch or a basketball court, and they play against each other. And they realize that, hey, we're all the same. We love our sports. We are young people that have talents. And so it brings about respect. And I think that's the most important thing, is that, the fair play and respect, the values of the Olympic Games transcend sport.
Can you think of examples? Recently in Houston, of course, there was a table tennis, and they were marking the 50-year anniversary of sports diplomacy through ping pong diplomacy. But can you think of examples along the way where we've seen it really play a role?
Well, in South Africa, around the rugby championship, that brought a whole country together. Recently, after apartheid, you had this big event, and it brought both the blacks and the whites together as one country supporting the South African team. That's internal, but it's still diplomacy. And then you have, there was Pakistan and India has had conflicts, and when their teams played in a cricket match, brought the leaders together after many years. There's many examples how sports has brought countries together.
Even in the example more recently of South Korea and their neighbors to the north.
Yes, the 2018 Winter Olympic Games, where you had a contingent from North Korea participate in the Pyeongchang Games.
The Olympics are also where disagreements between nations have played out. In December 2021, the U.S. said it was engaging in a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Games. No U.S. government officials will attend the event, but athletes from the U.S. will still compete. China's foreign ministry says the U.S., quote, undermined the foundation and atmosphere for China-U.S. sports exchanges and Olympics cooperation. The last full Olympics boycott by the U.S. was in 1980 at the Moscow Olympics. It was ordered by then President Jimmy Carter to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
that the decision of the world community to hold the Olympics in Moscow is an acknowledgement of approval of the foreign policy of the Soviet Union.
China also boycotted the games that year.
I still hear athletes from years gone by, and this is something you have to think about. You know, like you've trained your entire life. Your goal is to make it to the Olympics, and there's a very short window when you can go there and perform and do well. And I still hear athletes complain about Jimmy Carter and the boycott. And we're talking about diplomacy, but politics sometimes also is injected. I want to get your thoughts on that. And you know, you think about athletes, many of them, they don't really care about politics. They want to get out there and run or ski or skate. That's what they've lived their entire life for. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
It was an unfortunate situation that happened for the 80 games, and the athletes that were voting went in saying, no, we're going. And then, you know, your leader starts talking and changes your mind, and they walked out voting for the boycott. So this time, everybody's learned that boycotts have not worked. Athletes, as you say, want to compete, you know, and it's not their choice of where they're competing. So they are just most interested in, you know, get me to the place, give me a excellent condition to perform and show the world my best.
So what is the role, would you say, of athletes as ambassadors for their countries? Because I know in many respects you've got a rigid training formula, but then you're also representing a country when you do perform.
You know, I always tell athletes that they have so much going on personally that they have to first take care of themselves. But if they have that interest and desire to represent a cause or represent their country and to do good, that's important. And so many of them, especially now, they're finding ways to use their voice and to use their fan base as a way to get messages out. And I think whether it's messages for, you know, health or for politics or for whatever they are interested in, many of them give money. Johann Kals is one of the Olympians that stands out after the 1994 Winter Olympic Games. He was the star. He had 3 gold medals there, a total of 4 gold medals, originally from Norway. And he started the Right to Play Foundation that works with refugee kids. And he's been able to really leverage his Olympic clout to do good around the world. You know, where you had Muhammad Ali as the most, you know, the world ambassador for peace, and actually was the first to bring up Black Lives Matter, what we would call it today. But then you have, you know, Didier was just recently a global ambassador for the World Health Organization, because sport is also used to bring people together, to educate them about health issues and HIV and getting tested. And, you know, we can also use it now with COVID and other diseases that we have around the world.
Well, you brought up COVID. It's complicated a lot of lives, including your own. You've got a streak on the line here, which could be in jeopardy. And you've also attended so many of these Olympics. So talk to us about the last one, what it was like dealing with COVID, and now the fact that it looks like maybe that streak that you have might be in jeopardy.
I was very fortunate to be able to attend the 2020 Games, and I actually did research on COVID protocols, these playbooks that were put in place at kind of the last minute, and how did people adjust to them, and how did they actually, you know, work in, you know, in actuality. And overall, everybody was very pleased with those. China has its own system, but those playbooks have been tweaked slightly. And, you know, I pointed out some areas where they could be improved or enhanced. And so hopefully that will happen for the 2022 Games. The Beijing 2022 Games are definitely more restricted in terms of it is seriously a closed loop, where in Tokyo, the volunteers and the staff that live there were going in and out of the bubble. But in Beijing, everybody is going to be living within this bubble.
You have such a remarkable story, 20 Olympics. How does someone set out on this journey like yourself?
I really wanted to be an Olympian, but that didn't work out. So I set my thoughts on how to get involved in working the games. I went to the Olympic Training Center in 1983 as an intern, and then they offered me the opportunity to go work at the Sarajevo Games. After that, I then wrote a proposal that got me to the 88 Games, Winter Games, and then I worked at the 88 Games in Seoul, and I just kept going like that, kept volunteering in Los Angeles. I was attaché to the IOC, and then I started becoming a teacher at George Washington University in 1992, and I started bringing students because I learned so much as a student traveling to these Olympic Games that I said others must go too. And so ever since then, we've been going to the Games and doing research on primarily spectators. Why do they go? How much do they spend? What are they doing while they're there? And it's really been great for the International Olympic Committee to have this data and to share with sponsors and host cities.
I imagine you would say all of the Olympics that you've gone to have been special, or are there some that stand out?
Well, obviously my first, 1984 Sarajevo Winter Games, they stand out for many reasons. One is that it's no longer Yugoslavia. The opening ceremony ground is now a burial ground. There's just so many, and it was a miracle that there was no snow. We wake up in the morning and it's covered in this beautiful white snow. So I always say there's an Olympic God out there that, no matter what the weather is, when the Olympics come, somehow they make it work. And so Sarajevo were one of my favorites. And then Barcelona, 92, with the Dream Team. And what I think is the best is when you have a gathering place for all the fans to come. And at that point, all the athletes were there too, because there was less security. But Las Ramblas was the place. It was just magical. Everybody was walking, enjoying each other, and cheering for one another. So those were the two. And Lillehammer were another great games. It was a true snow country and snow lovers. We had Norwegians camping out, sub-zero degree temperature to be there for the Olympic Games.
Sarajevo, you're there, there's so much celebration, and then years later there's so much sorrow and sadness. What was it like for you to watch what happened there? Because, it obviously had to have a special place in your heart. It's the first one you mentioned. And then to watch it being torn apart and all the death and carnage.
One of my media friends that I've kept in touch with over the years said it best. We met during the games in a disco where we were hearing boom, boom, boom of the music. He went back a few years later to cover it for the war, and he was hearing the boom, 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 but it wasn't for the music. And, it's just amazing how fast situations happen. At that time, the Olympic Games had propelled Yugoslavia and Sarajevo to a new level. They brought in a lot of infrastructure and many other improvements, and it was just very sad to see what happened.
From global trade to tourism, Olympic host countries can see many benefits to putting on the Games, but it comes with a big cost. The Olympics are one of the most expensive mega events in the world. The average cost to a host country is $12 billion. Beijing has a $3.9 billion budget for the 2022 Winter Games, but that's just a fraction of the $40 billion price tag it spent hosting the 2008 Summer Games.
What about the complaints? Because I'm sure you've heard those. It costs way too much money. We don't get anything out of it. I mean, every Olympics we hear this. Is there some truth in that? And should the Olympics just be in just a few venues, as some people have suggested?
It really depends on the host country and how they see these games helping them in the long run. What the IOC is doing now is sitting down with host cities and saying, how can these Olympic Games help you, and how is it part of your long-term strategic plan? You can't just say, let's host a game and put up all these venues with no long-term strategic plan. And so I think going forward, that would work best. But the best examples are like 92 Olympic Games, where they had a strategic long-term plan of building a ring road, opening their city to the sea, and it propelled Barcelona to the #1 tourist spot. So there are great examples of how the Olympic Games have been beneficial to cities with a plan. London is another one, regenerating the east side of London. And I've been able to go back and see how beautiful it is, how vibrant it is. To tell you the truth, when I was there and I saw this brand new mall, I'm like, who's going to go to this afterwards? But when I returned, there were people living in the house, the Olympic Village. And so there is proof that the Olympic Games can be valuable to a community if well planned.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is if you have a plan and you execute it, there's a benefit on the other side. And this complaint about the costs, if you do it right, there is a return on investment.
Right, and people don't understand the costs. They need to really look at where that $50 billion went for the Sochi Olympic Games. I mean, they created a Vel ski resort. There was nothing, no ski resort, which most people don't understand. So creating a metro system, a train system to get up to the resort, creating the whole resort, putting in a new sewer system, electronic system. They redid that entire city. And they were, and other things go into those costs. The culture, there's a lot of graft, we call it. And so maybe 50% of that was just to get things done. And many people don't think about that. And also the long term is I want you to amortize that, whether it's 50 billion or 20 billion or how much it costs over the time that those facilities are going to be used, not during the 16 days. That's a whole new road system, a metro system. Athens had a new airport, a new transportation system, and that's still working today.
They call it the Belt and Road Initiative or the infrastructure bill here in the United States. I mean, you need infrastructure, and the benefits are long-term.
And even in Atlanta in 1996, they were able to secure federal transportation money 8 years in advance of when they were supposed to get it because of the Olympic Games. So that benefited that region by being able to improve their road system and their metro system for the Olympic Games.
How does the IOC play a role in sports diplomacy?
Well, the IOC, starting with President Samaranch, actually, who was an ambassador, he really put a lot of money into Olympic solidarity. Many people do not know that about $34,000 a day is distributed to countries around the world to help them develop sport. Because back in the 80s, there were, a handful of countries that won medals. Now, if you look at it, there's more and more distribution of medal winners across the world. And that is what, the Olympic spirit's about, is letting more people compete, more people win, and everybody feeling this spirit.
Lisa, thanks so much.
Thank you.